Hospitals, by their very nature, are liminal spaces. They exist on the threshold between life and death, wellness and sickness, hope and despair. Within their walls, the most profound human experiences unfold daily, leaving echoes that sometimes linger beyond the realm of medical explanation. Nurses, as constant witnesses to these intense moments, often find themselves privy to events that defy logic, brush against the paranormal, and leave an indelible mark on their psyches. These are their stories, whispered in hushed tones during quiet night shifts, or shared amongst trusted colleagues, tales of the uncanny, the unsettling, and the downright terrifying. Prepare to delve into the shadowed corners of healthcare, where the veil between worlds seems thin, and the ordinary can swiftly morph into the extraordinary. Story 1. The Whispers in Room 312. Nurse Emily had worked the night shift at St. Jude's Hospital for over a decade. She was accustomed to the quiet hum of machines, the soft rustle of linens, and the occasional hushed calls from patients. But Room 312 had always felt different. It was a standard private room on the older wing of the hospital, usually reserved for patients requiring long-term care. Over the years, a peculiar pattern had emerged. Patients placed in Room 312 often reported feeling a cold presence, hearing faint whispers when no one was around, and experiencing a general sense of unease. One particularly still night, Mrs. Gable, a frail elderly woman with a chronic respiratory condition, was the occupant of Room 312. Emily was making her rounds, her footsteps echoing softly in the deserted hallway. As she approached Room 312, she noticed the door was slightly ajar, a detail she distinctly remembered correcting on her previous check. Pushing it open gently, she found Mrs. Gable asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Everything seemed normal, yet a prickle of unease ran down Emily's spine. She proceeded with her routine checks, adjusting Mrs. Gable's oxygen and noting her vitals. As she was about to leave, she heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper, seemingly coming from the corner of the room near the old, unused wardrobe. It sounded like a woman's voice, too soft to discern any words, but undeniably present. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her ears, but the whispering had stopped. Shaking it off as fatigue, or perhaps the building settling, she completed her rounds. However, the next night, the whispers returned. This time, Emily was administering medication to Mrs. Gable when both of them heard it, a distinct sigh, followed by the faint murmur of voices. Mrs. Gable, though usually disoriented, looked at Emily with wide, frightened eyes. "Did you hear that, dear?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's like they're talking about something sad." Over the next few weeks, the phenomena in Room 312 intensified. Call lights would go off with no one pressing them. The television would flicker on and off. One night, a patient swore they saw a shadowy figure standing by the window. Emily, a pragmatic woman by nature, tried to find logical explanations for everything. Perhaps the old wiring in that wing was faulty. Maybe the patients were just more susceptible to nighttime anxieties. But one incident shattered her skepticism. She was alone in Room 312, documenting Mrs. Gable's progress, when she felt a distinct cold spot near the wardrobe. The whispering started again, clearer this time. She could almost make out words, phrases like lost and alone. Suddenly, the old wooden wardrobe door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but empty space. Emily fled the room, a cold dread gripping her. After that night, Room 312 remained empty for a while. Staff members whispered about it, sharing their own unsettling experiences. Eventually, a new patient was admitted. The cycle began again, the whispers continuing their mournful lament in the quiet darkness, a constant reminder of some unseen presence within the walls of St. Jude's. Story 2. The Unseen Hand on the Pediatric Ward. Sarah had always loved working with children. The pediatric ward, with its colorful murals and cheerful atmosphere, was her sanctuary. But even in this bright and hopeful place, shadows sometimes crept in. There was a particular room, 2B, that had a disquieting history. Several nurses had reported strange occurrences within its walls, especially late at night. One evening, little Michael, a 5-year-old recovering from surgery, was in room 2B. Sarah was checking on him during her rounds. He was asleep, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. As Sarah adjusted his blanket, she felt a distinct pressure on her hand, as if another hand had briefly rested on hers. She looked down, but Michael's arms were tucked under the covers. There was no one else in the room. Sarah initially dismissed it as her imagination, a fleeting sensory illusion in the stillness of the night. But over the next few nights, similar incidents occurred. While changing an IV bag, she felt a light tug on her sleeve. While reading a story to a restless child, she felt a gentle pat on her shoulder. Each time she turned to find herself alone. The other nurses on the night shift had their own stories about 2B. Some of them had heard faint giggling when no children were awake. Others had seen toys move inexplicably on their own. One nurse swore she saw the silhouette of a small child standing in the doorway late one night, only to vanish when she blinked. One particularly unsettling incident involved a young boy named Ethan, who was recovering from a severe asthma attack. He was often anxious and would frequently call for the nurses. One night, Sarah responded to his call light. He was sitting up in bed, pointing towards the corner of the room. "The little girl," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "She keeps touching my hair." Sarah looked, but there was nothing there. She reassured Ethan, attributing it to his anxiety and perhaps a lingering effect of his medication. But the next night, Ethan's mother stayed with him. Around 3 a.m., she frantically called for the nurses. She had been dozing in the chair when she felt someone gently stroking Ethan's hair. She woke up to see no one there, but Ethan was awake and crying, insisting that the little girl had been touching him again. Ethan's mother, a practical woman, was visibly shaken. After that, staff members began researching the history of the pediatric ward. They discovered that a young girl, a patient with a terminal illness, had passed away in room 2B many years ago. Her favorite pastime was playing with her dolls and gently stroking the hair of the other children in the ward. The unseen hand, the faint giggling, the moving toys, they all seemed to point to the lingering presence of this gentle spirit, forever watching over the children in her favorite room. Story 3. The Elevator That Knew Too Much. Mark was a seasoned nurse in the cardiac care unit. The hospital had several elevators, but Elevator C had a reputation. It was old, prone to occasional malfunctions, and some staff members swore it had a mind of its own. It would sometimes skip floors, open its doors to empty hallways, and even make strange groaning noises when no one was inside. One particularly stressful night, the cardiac care unit was overflowing with patients. Mark was rushing to transport a critical patient to the radiology department on the lower level. He pressed the button for Elevator C, the closest one available. The elevator arrived, its doors creaking open to reveal an empty car. Mark wheeled the patient in, along with the necessary monitoring equipment. He pressed the button for the basement level. The elevator descended smoothly for a few floors, then suddenly lurched to a stop between levels. The lights flickered, and an unsettling silence filled the car. The patient, already in a precarious condition, became agitated. Mark tried pressing the emergency button, but there was no response. He tried the call button. Silence. He pounded on the doors and shouted for help, but the thick walls of the elevator seemed to absorb all sound. He was trapped with a critically ill patient in a stalled elevator with no way to call for assistance. After what felt like an eternity, the elevator suddenly started moving again. It continued its descent to the basement level without further incident. Mark rushed the patient to radiology, his nerves frayed. Later that night, during a quiet moment at the nurse's station, Mark recounted his experience to a group of colleagues. Several of them nodded knowingly. "Oh, you got stuck on elevator C," one of them said. "It does that sometimes." "But the call button didn't work," Mark protested, "and I couldn't get any response on the emergency line."
An older nurse leaned in, her expression serious. "Mark, there have been incidents with that elevator over the years. There was a patient who died in it during a power outage decades ago. Some say his spirit is still trapped, and the elevator acts up when it senses distress." Mark scoffed, attributing it to old hospital lore. But then another nurse chimed in. "You know, a few months ago, I was on elevator C with a patient who was coding. The elevator stalled between floors, just like you described, and the call button didn't work for me either." A shiver ran down Mark's spine. He started to recall other odd occurrences with elevator C. The times it opened on floors with no call, the strange groaning sounds when empty, the flickering lights. Could it be more than just a faulty machine? The following week, elevator C was taken out of service for maintenance. When it returned, the strange occurrences seemed to subside for a while. But every now and then, late at night, when Mark had to use that elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that the elevator remembered the distress of its past passengers and held a silent, unseen presence within its creaking frame.
Story 4. The Laughter in the Morgue. Nurse Ben had the unenviable task of occasionally assisting in the hospital morgue, usually late at night when a second pair of hands was needed. The morgue was located in the oldest part of the hospital, a dimly lit, perpetually cold space that always carried a heavy, somber atmosphere. Ben never liked going down there, but it was part of his job. One particularly late night, Ben was called to the morgue to help transfer a patient who had passed away unexpectedly. The usual technician was off sick, and Ben was the only available staff member. He made his way down the dimly lit corridor, the silence broken only by the rhythmic squeak of his shoes. The morgue was consisted of several refrigerated compartments and a central examination table. As Ben began the transfer, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air felt heavy, and the silence seemed to press in on him. He tried to focus on the task at hand, his movements deliberate and efficient. Suddenly, he heard it. A faint, almost childlike giggle, seemingly coming from the far end of the morgue. Ben froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound was unsettlingly out of place in that cold, silent room. He looked around, but there was no one else there. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the building settling, or perhaps his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But then he heard it again, this time a little clearer, followed by a soft, muffled sound that resembled playful chatter. Ben's blood ran cold. He moved quickly, completing the transfer as fast as he could. As he was about to leave, he heard it once more, a distinct burst of laughter, higher pitched this time and closer. It sounded like a group of children whispering and giggling amongst themselves. He didn't look back. He practically ran out of the morgue, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't mention what he had heard to anyone, fearing they would think he was losing his mind. However, a few weeks later, Ben was talking to an older security guard who had worked at the hospital for decades. Casually, he mentioned the unsettling atmosphere of the morgue. The guard nodded. "Ah, yes," he said. "The children. You heard them, did you?" Ben was taken aback. "The children? What do you mean?" The guard explained that before the hospital was built, the site was occupied by an orphanage that had burned down in a tragic fire. Several children had perished in the blaze. Over the years, many staff members, particularly those working late at night in the vicinity of the morgue, had reported hearing faint laughter, whispers, and the sounds of children playing. The morgue, it seemed, was located on or near the site of the old orphanage. Ben never went back to the morgue alone after that. The thought of those unseen children, their playful laughter echoing in the cold silence of the dead, was a chilling reminder of the tragedies that could linger within the walls of the hospital, unseen but never truly gone. Story 5. The Shadow in the Stairwell. David was a young nurse working the late shift in a large, sprawling hospital. To get from his unit on the 5th floor to the pharmacy in the basement after hours, he often used the back stairwell, a dimly lit and rarely used passage that was rumored to be a bit creepy. Most staff preferred the elevators, but David found the quiet solitude of the stairwell a welcome change during his hectic shifts. One particularly foggy night, David needed to pick up an urgent medication for a patient. He took the back stairwell down, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he descended to the 3rd floor landing, he noticed a dark shadow at the bottom of the next flight of stairs. It was tall and thin, its form indistinct in the dim light. Most staff preferred the elevators, but David found the quiet solitude of the stairwell a welcome change during his hectic shifts. One particularly foggy night, David needed to pick up an urgent medication for a patient. He took the back stairwell down, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he descended to the 3rd floor landing, he noticed a dark shadow at the bottom of the next flight of stairs. It was tall and thin, its form indistinct in the dim light. David initially thought it was another staff member, perhaps taking a break. "Hello?" he called out. There was no response. He continued down the stairs, and as he got closer, he realized the shadow wasn't moving. It was just standing there, silent and still. As he reached the landing, he could make out more details. The shadow was vaguely human-shaped, but seemed too elongated and thin to be a normal person. It didn't appear to be casting a shadow of its own, despite the dim emergency lights illuminating the stairwell. A cold wave of unease washed over David. He cleared his throat. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a little shaky. Still no response. The shadow remained motionless, its dark form absorbing what little light there was. David decided to pass it quickly. As he took the first step down the next flight, he felt a sudden sharp drop in temperature, as if he had walked into a pocket of icy air. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He glanced back at the shadow, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw it tilt its head, as if observing him. He hurried down the remaining stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the brightly lit pharmacy in the basement. After collecting the medication, he debated whether to take the elevator back up. The thought of facing that silent, unmoving shadow again in the dimly lit stairwell filled him with dread. He eventually decided to brave the stairwell again, telling himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. This time, as he descended, the stairwell was empty. The air was normal, and the shadows cast by the emergency lights were ordinary. David tried to forget the incident, attributing it to fatigue and the eerie atmosphere of the old hospital. But over the next few weeks, other nurses on the late shift began to report similar sightings in the back stairwell. A tall, dark, silent figure that would appear and disappear without explanation. Some said they felt an intense coldness when they encountered it. Others reported a feeling of being watched. The back stairwell became a place to avoid after dark. Staff members would take the long way around or wait for the elevators, no matter how slow. The shadow remained an unexplained mystery, a chilling presence in the forgotten corners of the hospital, a silent sentinel that seemed to watch the living from the periphery, a constant reminder of the unseen and the unknown that can lurk just beyond the edge of our perception. Conclusion. These stories, shared by nurses who have witnessed the extraordinary within the ordinary confines of their workplaces, offer a glimpse into the hidden realities of hospital life. They serve as a reminder that while science and medicine strive to explain the complexities of life and death, there remain experiences that defy easy categorization, leaving us to ponder the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. The dedication and compassion of nurses often place them at the forefront of these unsettling events, making them the keepers of tales that continue to fascinate and unnerve in equal measure. The hospital, a place of healing and hope, can also be a stage for the unexplained, a testament to the enduring human fascination with the spectral and the unknown, a constant reminder of the unseen and the unknown that can lurk just beyond the edge of our perception.